All right, Alan, thank you for joining us on 1.73 Mission Over Measure. I'd like to just dive right in and talk a little bit about you and your work, where you're from, and, kind of how you got to where you are at this point.
Sounds great. Well, thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Tell us
So,
about, so who's Allan Bruford?
all right. So Allan Bruford is someone who was moved to America just before his 10th birthday. I moved over here with my parents at the time. My father was working at Ford, and it's definitely an exciting part of my life there in terms of coming over to a new country, having a whole new, appreciation for a new way of life. And first thing you notice when moving to America was, everything is bigger, right? The roads, the cars, the houses, like everything. um, and so kind of, having grown up here with friends and going to high school here and then university at Michigan State, kind of got into, always had a passion for computers and technology kind of growing up. And always wanted a computer or a laptop while in high school, and never got one until kind of close to my senior year. So it was something that was able to get into and kind of set the course of my life. Technology became the focus, and kind of went to university for that, and out of university got a job in Birmingham, Michigan for a web agency kind of company. And then from there on to Quicken Loans, where I was about 10 years there. And then from there met up with a couple entrepreneurs out of Ann Arbor, Michigan, and been working there for the last almost 6 years now.
So how'd you find Quicken? Like, what was it? What was it about? I'm presuming it was a technology role.
Yeah, it was. So it's a kind of a great question, and kind of, when I reflect on that, it's like one pivotal moment in my life. I was actually, my wife had a good friend who was dating someone there. And although he was sort of leaving, he mentioned, it was a great place to work and be in. And so anyway, kind of had referred me through. I applied for a position as a software engineer, working on the websites, and kind of, slowly grew my specialty and career there. Had a great mentor. And so in terms of going there, my roles changed slowly from software engineer to senior software engineer to software architect, and had the fortune to work on a great number of projects. Projects around, not just developing our websites out, but supporting Super Bowl campaigns, supporting, campaigns around $1 billion brackets, for March Madness, supporting campaigns. And just towards the end of my career there, I was working on what would be like a Tiger team or a Skunks Works team, where we kind of inject into different areas of the organization and help kind of build consensus around implementing change with a team, and trying to help bring technology to provide that change for that team. It was a great time.
So if it sounds like that was going pretty well for a while. You said 10
I was
years?
going, just shy, about 9 years and 9 months or so. And then the one thing that was kind of missing, and things grew there a lot, just under, I think, 300 team members in technology when I joined, and just over 2,400 team members in technology when I left. And so, over time, as the size of the organization grew, processes changed. Some things got a little more bureaucratic, but overall, the one thing that was really missing for me was, and I kind of had it at the smaller web development agency in Birmingham, was a sense of like entrepreneurship, right? A sense of being able to move quickly. And so the idea now being in an environment where, we can have a conversation in the morning and be implementing the solution in the afternoon, just really able to kind of take advantage of, being maybe in a speedboat versus being in a cruise ship. The nimbleness.
So how did you meet the folks in Ann Arbor?
Again, it comes down to the people that I met at Quicken Loans, the people on the team that I was on there. Met some of my, some great life friends there. Ended up moving to Plymouth to be kind of close to all these coworkers there. And one of the owners of the company that I'm at now is married to the cousin of one of my best friend's wives. So, he was kind of talking, he was talking to me at some point and telling me about, this opportunity with, this guy he knows, and kind of we went to we happened to join him at a Red Wings game and sat down. I was talking with one of these owners and as well as the CFO from this company, and just kind of talking through, and it was just painful to hear some of the problems that they were dealing with. The medical industry as a whole kind of is slow to adopt, I think, some technology and process improvements, but to hear some of the pain points that they were dealing with was just, it was painful to hear that and to know that, you can provide much better solutions.
What drew you, and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like through your career at Quicken and then the new entrepreneur group, it was very much a position of service and helping. It sounded like your main goal, your main mission was to be of service and to help improve. Was that something that you found you arrived in a position, say when you got into Quicken Loans and you're like, okay, my position is to help people. Oh, I kind of like this. I'm going to keep going. Or was this kind of like a subconscious where it's like, I want to help people. Technology is the tool in which I can do it. Was that something a little more true to you and than it was just happenstance?
Yeah, I think, technology, I think you can look at as an actual trade at this point. And in terms of having those tools in your tool belt and helping people, when you see someone struggling, right, with a problem, right, or they have a pain point or a pressure point, to be able to alleviate that for them is, it's a great feeling, right? And it's to be able to help someone achieve their goal is very empowering. And so that's something that, kind of, gives me a high, right? In terms of helping someone who might be struggling with a problem or doing something repetitive over and over again, or doing something where I know that there's a better way. And it's not always to say that the better way is the right way, right? It's about, educating people and helping people broaden their perspectives on the way to do things, to try and help kind of give them that second eye. And, more times than not, once people see an alternate way to solve a problem that they're trying to solve day in and day out, they're very excited to see that something that they might be spending 90 minutes a day on can be done in, 12 minutes. So it's rewarding and empowering to help people solve those problems.
When we were before we hit the record button, Allan, you were sharing about, I won't share the one Ikagai image that you shared earlier, but I love that idea, or the model, Ikagai model, Ikigai, not like how Preston would spell it, ICKY space. But it's interesting, like, go back to that for a moment. So part of that diagram or that model is element of what you love to do. Did technology just come out of the blue for you and say like, man, that's just really cool stuff? Or did you pursue it intentionally?
So I was fortunate in that the group of friends that I got in with when I moved to America all were interested in video gaming, right? So this is, the kind of the late 90s, and we would cart, our family computers back and forth to each other's houses to, try and figure out TCP/IP settings to jump on a local area network so that we could play, Total Annihilations, StarCraft, Red Alert, in LAN mode. So, we'd have these kind of LAN parties and stuff. So that was always kind of figuring out technology was always a necessity of, playing the video games. But outside of that, I think when it really hit for me would have been learning how to, I think program is generous, but so I'll say script, writing scripts and basically being able to have the computer do my bidding, right? And so whether I'm sitting there and doing something, and there is a concept called RPA, robotic process automation, where you can basically record like a macro of doing something and then play that back and have the computer do it, right? So you can do something once and then the computer can do it, 100 times. But yeah, figuring out essentially automation early was a very fun thing for me. And so taking that through even to to video games and even at university in the early 2000s with even games like World of Warcraft and things like that, and figuring out how to automate the game to achieve some in-game results was very rewarding for me, and kind of the time when I knew, hey, there's something here for me.
So if there were, who were some of the naysayers, either friends from home, others you met that said, yeah, Allan, I don't know if that's the right thing, or you seem to have a real interest in it, but there's no real job in that world. So if there were naysayers, who were they? What would they say?
Yeah, I think, there's always been, I don't want to paint the picture that I don't have, necessarily a supportive family, but I do think that there was a time when my parents thought that, the computers were more of, I'd say, a distraction, but, not necessarily a tool of productivity for me, right? And so that, it might be a case where, you're spending too much time on the computer, right? Or that, and I think that I probably adopted a understanding of, certainly learning to script and then, further learning to program and things like that. I adopted an understanding of computers that, I think it's not uncommon in families to have, kids be the ones who are kind of fixing the family printer, right? Or the family network when it goes down, or the things like that. So, I quickly became that person in our household. And, I think there was a time where my parents wouldn't have thought that having my own computer, be it in the late 90s, was necessarily a good investment. So I do think that, in terms of some of the projects, we'll call them, that I went on to do even before, in high school, and then in university, that, shows just small businesses that, wouldn't have been possible without that programming knowledge, I think was the inflection point for my parents to see that, okay, maybe there is something here for him, right?
Yeah, that's.
Well, it says it
okay.
sounds. Go ahead.
Nope.
What we had mentioned earlier about using technology to be a tool of service. It sounded like that's where it kind of started to grow, in that sense of just being, because I very much experienced the same thing. I love video games, grew up playing, so I was also like oh, my phone isn't working, can you please come help, being that being the person to solve the technology, because you kind of you grow up on that generation of the technology is advancing so fast, and it growing up with it, you're able to keep up. But if it's something that you never grew up with, it's just much harder to learn. So that speaks to me in that sense of that role. But with you and using technology as a service and helping people, that sounds like where it started. I want to go into what you do today, because it seems like it's the complete culmination of using technology of service to heal even. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you're doing today with your company.
Absolutely, yeah. So the company I'm at, WRS, again, out of Ann Arbor, we are in the medical space. We provide primarily cold compression therapy to injured workers. And it's a big kind of thing for us to get those workers back healthy and back to work, right, to a better quality of life. And so, in order to support that business, so I came aboard, like I said, a little over 5 years ago now, as our chief technology officer. And then recently, this past year, I've been in the role of our chief operating officer. And so bringing that same methodology outside of just our technology pillar to kind of our operations as a whole, helping, be it our billing team to be able to more effectively, what you kind of say, work smarter, not harder, right? Be able to more effectively do their work day in and day out, with exhibiting less effort in order to achieve those results. Providing technology to automate some of those steps that they were previously maybe manually doing. Providing a quality of life improvement to maybe our patient care team who are reaching out and calling these patients, right? Being able to provide them with a tool that kind of keeps track of all the patients, what step they're at in the process, who needs to be called today, which patients we need to kind of reach out to get units back from. Giving our sales team a better insight into where to pursue their time, right, in terms of growing the business, because there's areas where would have a higher return on investment of time than other areas, but no one without having that information, no one knows where that is. So you often have gut feelings, and sometimes those gut feelings are right, and sometimes they are way off. And so having data to kind of see that, I think, really helps. So yeah, it's really about providing that same level of service to all of our entire organization in terms of where they can get a better return on their investment of time throughout the day.
So how'd you define success when you're in the technology role? Was it that, like, how we can save time? And I want to be responsible for simplifying too much.
Yeah. So I think, it's very easy to look at, metrics, right? As long as you have the right metrics to find there. But I do think that, there's a little bit of a, I don't say it's an unrewarded field, but there is a sense of that, insurance as well, right? Like essentially, if you have a technology team and they are doing everything right, then you're probably not noticing, right? Like a lot of what the technology solutions implement are to help avoid obstacles before you get to them. And so, a lot of those pain points, hopefully you're never experiencing, because the technology team is helping, providing solutions to navigate those, before you kind of hit the iceberg, rather than triage once you've hit the iceberg. So certainly there are times where, that's not the case, and, technology has to come in and help kind of triage and clean up maybe a mess that they created themselves. But so I think, from success from that perspective is just making sure that the solutions and the customers that you're supporting as a technologist, you're meeting their needs. right? And certainly you always have customers that want more and more and more and more, and are ultimately never satisfied. But by and large, as long as you have a broad enough customer base, I think you'll get a clear inkling of if you're meeting the needs of your customers, and which customers might just be the difficult customers that you might be stuck working with.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever find, because that sounds to me, that sounds like a mission to strive for, is that quality that you provide. Was there a point in time where you kind of said, oh guys, like we're going the wrong way, like we're either going the wrong way, or we're going in the right direction, but we're going too fast or not moving at all? So, and I know you spoke to this before we started recording. I'd love for you to talk about kind of that idea that had brought up.
Yeah. So I think, certainly when even the title of this podcast, right? Mission over measure. I think when we talk about, what your mission is and what your measure is, and both of those, to an extent are important, but I think your mission is your compass, right? Your mission is your bearing. That's where you're going. That's you have a target that you're trying to achieve. Your measures are your gauges, right? So, you might be looking at your speed, right, and see that you're going 100 mile an hour. That's great. But what does your compass say, right? Are you going 100 mile an hour in the right direction, or are you going 100 mile an hour in the wrong direction, right? Because if you're 180 degrees off course, then, you're making the situation worse for yourself. So, I'd argue that again, as it relates back particularly to mission over measure, you're better off being on course and going slow than you are being off course and going fast, right? Because you're potentially making the problem a lot worse. And I'll even say, today with the team that I work with, both owners of the organization have a sales background. Both very entrepreneurial. Love working with them and where I'm at. But, they will tend to, again, coming from a sales background, not to, paint with a broad brush here, but I've noticed salespeople like to say yes. Salespeople like to say yes and figure it out later, right? And there's, not necessarily a terrible strategy, I guess, but, it served them well for sure. But ultimately, there is, I think, some wisdom in sometimes slowing down, right, to make sure that, again, the direction, the bearing that you have is the right bearing. You will achieve more, right, if you can ensure that you're on course. I have a 7-month-old, right, and a 7-year-old, and so tortoise in the hare is something that I've read a lot, but like slow and steady wins the race, right? There's a lot of wisdom in that, right? And there are certainly times where you have to, pull it out and get going, right? And just, you don't want to, paralysis by analysis and be sitting around and thinking about something forever. And there's certainly times where being first to market is going to give you that competitive advantage. But ultimately, I think from what I've seen a lot more is, if you're just always, going fast, and just doing, and not taking the time to take 2 steps back, look at the bigger picture, making sure that you're still heading in the right direction, and the things that you're adhering to a strategy, right? You can get in a lot of trouble by just implementing tactic without kind of having a holistic strategy that you're adhering to. It's seen that time and time again, be it with working with marketing teams, working with sales teams. And so, and I think there'll always be this sense of, oh, well, the technology guy just wants to, talk about every possible scenario, and we just need to get going and things like that. And ultimately, I think, for the most part, the people that I've worked with in technology, it's not that we want to talk about every scenario necessarily. It's that when we're telling the computer how to do something, that instruction needs to take into account everything that can happen, right? There's kind of a wisdom there in that if it can happen, it will happen eventually. And so what we are just trying to avoid is ambiguity or unknown behavior. And so there's a concept which is like a state machine, right? And so in a state machine, sort of every transition is actually defined. And so kind of one of the easy examples of a state machine is like a turnstile, right? So if you come up to a turnstile, it's locked. You can't go through it, right? Once you put your quarter in or whatever your token in, it's now unlocked and the bar will rotate and now it's locked again, right? It rotates once and now it's locked. So that is a state machine. That's a finite state machine. And so it is, every state is defined and every transition is defined. And that's great. Not every situation you can do that in, but typically technologists are not trying to be difficult in terms of trying to figure out every situation. They're just trying to ensure that the solution that they're putting in place meets the needs. And there's oftentimes a lot more variables than the person making the request might realize. And so it's just trying to help them get to that full holistic picture of what needs to be done.
How do you work on keeping your, I guess, your compass, your mission calibrated? Because it sounds like, you run into a lot of people that don't think necessarily like-minded with you in the process in which you do things or the things you want to achieve or how you achieve them rather. So when you run into people like that, whether it be the sales guys that are going a million miles an hour or the people that don't want to think about every possibility, how are you able to, kind of take a breath and say, and not, I guess, not fold in and just be like, yeah, let's just go a million miles an hour and see what happens. What are you able to do to kind of keep that compass aligned?
Yeah, I think, again, certainly having the right partner helps, right? Like when in working with the team. And I think it's, again, making sure that you and whoever you're working with are both aligned on what the outcome needs to be. And so, whenever I feel like we might be deviating off course, I will just try and back the conversation up, right? In terms of, because you're not trying to be difficult. You're not trying to, again, if you start getting into an argument, then that's non-productive conversation typically. So again, it's just trying to get to a point where you can agree, right, or you can have alignment on what it is that you're trying to get to, and then I think trying to help educate or forecast or just, if you see a path that you're going down that might have some obstacles in it or that might, again, be deviating off course, sharing that information, right? I think uncommunicated expectations are the source of all kind of, unhappiness, disgruntlement, and disputes. So making sure that kind of that, sharing information is only going to help that. And so I really do think that kind of coming at that from a partnership perspective is not the only way, but the most effective way to help kind of realign and get back on course. But yeah, it's constantly just taking a step back from the tactic that you're currently in and ensuring that you're still adhering to your overall strategy, and again that your strategy is tied back to your mission, right? Your mission statement, be it for the company, be it for you personally, whether it's, again, professionally within your company, if you find yourself doing some things like, is this really kind of in service of our organization's mission, right? Is this really something that's, getting us closer to, what we're trying to achieve or what we said we're setting out to do? Or whether it's in your personal life, right? In terms of with your family and things like that, right? If you again, take a gut check, take a step back and like, what am I doing right now? Right? Like, is this in service of what I'm trying to, what my family is trying to achieve this year, this decade, right? This life.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. Your state machine, correct? STATE.
That's correct.
Is that like an if then scenario?
It can be in a simple context. In a more complicated complex, it could be like, again, going to a bank, an ATM, having a finite, it's good for an ATM to be a finite state machine, right? You don't want an ATM to necessarily get into a situation where it doesn't know what to do and it just starts dispensing $100 bills. Well, maybe we do as people walking along the street, but if you're the bankers, you don't. So, and if you walk up to that ATM, you put your debit card in and you type in your PIN, there's a few transitions that can occur now, right? You can do a withdrawal, you can do a deposit, you can do a balance inquiry, right? These are all different transitions that can occur from that state. Your state might be, logged in, right, to that ATM, but the next transition that you make will determine the next state. If you tell the machine you'd like to do a withdrawal, well, now you're going into a withdrawal state, right? And that state should have some, limiting factors in place, right? Like maybe you shouldn't be able to withdraw more than the maximum of your balance or your daily withdrawal limit, right? So there are guards in place, but the machine should never be able to get into an unknown state, and every next action should be predetermined, right? So once you get into the withdrawal state, you shouldn't be able to, once you're in that state, be putting money into the machine, right? That doesn't make any sense. Like once you're in that state, the next transition might be just telling the machine how much you would like to withdraw, right? And then the machine will have to validate again against, is that within the confines of your maximum daily limit or your account balance? But it's, so it's not so much if this, then that, but more about a pathway through transitions and states. And every state will either have a list of transitions that can occur next, or whether or not you can even go backwards, right? Because if you go into the withdrawal state, you might be like, oh, what am I doing? I have a check here I need to deposit, right? Go back, right? So you can go back into the logged in state. So now you can go down the other path of deposit. But if you're in the withdrawal state and you've actually told the machine you want to withdraw that money, then you can't really go back, right? Once the machine's given you that money, that's happened, right? So you might have to then complete that transaction and reset back to the login state.
Well, I appreciate you walking through that, because what struck me about something you said earlier, it's better to, and correct me if I'm off track, it's better to go in the right direction slowly than, these are my words, than the wrong direction quickly. And I guess I can understand that. However, isn't there a point, Allan, at which like we need to be a little less concerned whether this is absolutely the right direction, because the speed is a necessary ingredient? Or is it, I mean, it's just fascinating, because knowing your team, knowing you and knowing your team, there are a couple of folks on your team who are probably roll a little bit more like me. You and Henry, it's interesting, probably are a little bit more similar. Henry is the right direction in a methodical way. I tend to just say, yeah, well, let's just see what happens. When I lived in Florida for a few years, my two Floridian roommates, and especially Roy, used to say, hey, they never called me Preston. They also called me Yankee. Hey, Yankee, you know the last two things a Southerner says before he dies? And I go, okay, Roy, what's this? Watch this. and it's one of those, like, that's just how he rolled. And I think, there's a couple of folks on your team that probably move in that direction. I'm curious though, like, what is it that the folks who would approach, who are willing to tolerate wrong directions for speed versus sacrifice speed for right direction, what are each of those two people measuring? So I'm curious on the gauges. And I don't think it's right or wrong. I'm just curious.
I think for some people, the measurements are just distance traveled, right? And so, you could have again, it comes back to having at least alignment on what your goal is. If your goal is just to get out there and see the world, then, speed at which you're traveling might be a great indicator, right? As long as, as long as you're not going in circles, you're seeing a lot, you might be seeing a lot of the world. That's great. If your goal is, if you have a target, if you have a destination that you're trying to reach, then it requires a little more precision, right? And I think that, not to say that there's only, one path to get there, right? Certainly if you're driving from, Michigan to Florida, there's probably a few different ways you can get there, right? A lot of people are probably going to take a few of the same roads. But, there's detours and deviations that you can take. But if you're trying to get from Michigan to Florida and you find yourself halfway through Canada, you're probably not getting closer to your goal. And so again, if your goal is to just see the world, great. You're probably having a wonderful time, and you'll loop back around at some point and you'll come back through to the continental United States. But ultimately, if, what is your goal and what are you out to achieve, right? Again, metrics are great. Metrics help with accountability, right? They help stave off any type of complacency within an organization. They help avoid ineffectiveness and waste within an organization. But if they're implemented incorrectly, or if that's all that you're focused on, you risk not moving closer to your mission, right? You miss not moving closer to your goal. You miss not getting closer to your destination, from my perspective.
In what ways have going on the opposite side, have the million miles an hour mindset helped you? Were there points where you were like paralysis by analysis? That's something I very much experienced. I don't know if you've taken the Colby index before. For those who haven't, it's just like a personality test that can walk you through and give you data on, how you go about problem solving, how you go about doing something. And so there's 4 different categories. It's fact finder, follow through, quick start, and implementer. And so in fact finder, I'm an 8 out of 8 on the scale of 1 to 10, so very high, and I'm a 1 quick start. So I like all the information, and I take a very long time to do something about it. So it's something that speaks very true to me. So I'd want to hear your perspective on the situations or the parts in your life where going really fast helped you actually get closer to the mission in a healthy speed.
Yeah. So I will say one of the great things, kind of picking up at Quicken Loans was, the culture of Quicken Loans was great, and the isms, which are constantly evolving. But during my time there, one of the isms was take the roast out of the oven, right? The principle there being the idea of taking a longer time to make a decision doesn't necessarily increase your chances of making a better decision. And so with that kind of context, there are times where you just have to go, right? And times, for example, again, when if you're working on a campaign for, under a tight deadline, right? Be it for, again, a Super Bowl or for a March Madness bracket competition, or, there are certainly what could be very stressful times where you just have to go, right? You just have to, we're going to have a solution. It might not be the one that, if we sit around and design this all day, that would be the perfect solution, but you just have to trust, right? Trust is a huge part of that. And working with a team where, you have complementing skill sets. And again, going back to kind of, with where I am now and the 2 owners of the organization coming from a sales background and being very entrepreneurial themselves, I trust that they are able to, when we're running off in a direction, that there's, if I can't see the destination there, or if I can't, if I don't have the time to take 2 steps back and, ensure that we're on the right path, right? If you're in the driver's seat and you've got your, pedal accelerator to the floor, like, yeah, you try and just how can I provide the best value to what we're doing right now? And that's, keep my eyes on the road and keep my hands on the wheel, right? And so those are instances where, again, you have to trust that your navigator, right, or the whoever, whoever is giving those directions, um, you either has a great gut, or that you're in this together, and that you've communicated, hey, I want to make sure that we're heading in the right direction, but if we're not, like, we're in this together, and that we're doing what we need to do, and at some point we'll be able to kind of come up for air. And as long as there's a high level of trust there, that you're both trying to do the best thing for the organization, whenever you do have that time to come up for air and recalibrate, you're not blaming them because, hey, you didn't have the time to stop and look when we were in the thick of it. And that they're not blaming you in terms of, well, why were you driving so fast in this direction? So again, having that level of trust, I think, is just, you may or may not be heading in the right direction, but as long as you're both willing to gamble with each other, then that you're going to be in a good place, and you're not blaming each other when you're there or not there.
Mm-hmm. Is there, we'll start to wrap things up here, is there a specific quote, either from a movie, a book, poem, whatever it may be, that speaks to maybe your mission or your values or something that, when you're in an unknown situation, or you just need some sort of guidance, you just kind of like think of a quote, and it's like, oh, like, maybe that's why I'm doing it, or something like that.
Yeah, and I think it's I think it was Thomas Edison, but it's I have not failed. I found 10,000 ways that don't work. It's one that I love. It's one that I used to kind of look at daily in terms of just, especially with programming and debugging, and constantly having things that just don't come necessarily back. Because the nice thing about computers is they generally always do exactly what you tell them to do. So if they're not doing what you want them to do, it's because you didn't probably instruct them correctly. So yeah, I love that one. I haven't failed. I've found 10,000 ways that don't work.
Allan, where can people find your company if they want to learn more about it?
Yeah, I'd love to. You can find us online, WRS.us, or we're also on LinkedIn. Search for the WRS Group.
Allan, thank you for this.
Oh.
It's a treat just getting to know you through this conversation a little bit differently than our usual conversations. And it just, again, the lessons learned, I love that. Right direction slowly versus the wrong direction fast. I am probably more guilty of the latter in most cases. So
yes.
Yeah, I think it's easier to build momentum than it is to get back on course. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on, and it's been a pleasure. And Henry, wonderful to meet you, and yeah, just love working with you guys.
Nice to meet you as well, Allan. Thank you so much.